what's up?
Paramore has some deep lore, like real soap opera level history, and it's wild to think they've been around since the early 2000s. If you ever wanted to take a trip down the pop punk or alt rock lane, Paramore is just that band. But for all of their success, this group has gone through hell behind the scenes, and whether it was fair or not, everything seemed to orbit around Hayley Williams. She was the focal point of every headline, every breakup, every lawsuit, every rumor. Some saw her as the glue holding things together. Others saw her as the reason it all kept falling apart. From secret relationships and messy breakups to creative tension and religious differences and bandmates quitting and suing, Paramore's lineup has rotated like a revolving door. And Hayley has always been at the center of it, not because she tried to be the star, but because the industry made her one, and that came with a price. Hayley Williams' journey really started with how well she knew herself as an artist at an early age. In the early 2000s, she and her mom left Mississippi behind to escape a toxic, abusive home life. They landed in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. Hayley was only 13, but she was already deeply passionate about music. While attending a private school and taking vocal lessons, she started embedding herself in the local rock scene. With the help of her mom, she was looking to find her sound and her people. That's when she met brothers Josh and Zach, two people who are on similar pathways as Hayley. They immediately clicked both musically and personally, along with Jeremy Davis. They started off so young, making music in their garages. But Hayley was the golden ticket who really had something brewing in the background. Behind the scenes, Hayley was actually signed by Atlantic Records. So even without her bandmates, Hayley was destined to have a career regardless, because once she made it to Tennessee, it's like the dominoes started falling in her favor. Things started coming full circle for her. She met her future bandmates, got signed by a major record label at like 13-14, which is like pretty productive. But Atlantic saw Hayley as a pop punk star similar to artists like Avril Lavigne. But Hayley didn't want to be a pop princess. Since a kid, she's always envisioned being in a band. That was her main priority, and she fought with Atlantic about that continuously until they eventually just let her have it. But from the moment Paramore began, Hayley was labeled as the star, and that label stuck harder than anyone expected. To the industry, Paramore was Hayley and those other guys, and it pissed the rest of the band off, especially Josh Farrow, who felt like Paramore was his band too. Paramore's first album, All We Know Is Falling, was released in 2005. At the time, the band was still teenagers, Hayley being 16, and although the album didn't explode commercially right away, it was successful enough. The album was largely inspired by the sudden departure of Jeremy. He was the founding member and close friends with Hayley, Josh, and Zach, but according to interviews over the years, he struggled with the uncertainty of the band's future. At that point, Paramore was just a group of teenagers with no major budget, no big hit, and no guarantee of success. With Jeremy being the oldest, he had his doubts, but he wasn't even that old. He was only like 19-20. Either way, he felt pressure about being in a band full time. The pressure of touring, recording, and possibly failing. It felt too overwhelming for him. Jeremy left because he just wasn't sure he wanted that life. His exit hit the band really hard. Hayley described it as a betrayal, not just musically but also personally, because he quit right before recording began. So the empty red couch on the album cover represented that absence. They had the singles All We Know and Conspiracy. What the public didn't know back then was that Hayley and Josh were secretly dating throughout the time on their first two albums. During the initial duration of Paramore, they managed to keep the relationship private. The album Riot was Paramore's true breakout moment. The album was high energy, raw, and just a fire album all in all. The single Misery Business put Paramore on the map in a major way. Misery Business became their first charting hit, peaking at 26 on Billboard, and eventually earning a triple platinum status. Music television was actually a thing. It was everywhere, on MTV, VH1, on the radio, and even Guitar Hero. Hayley's entire aesthetic became the main focal point of the group. Her bright orange hair and her style really resonated with her audience. It was a great successor album and gave us the singles Crush, 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 and That's What You Get.
Nothing compares to a quiet evening alone. So that's what you get.
The success for Riot only intensified the tension brewing within the band. Behind the scenes, Josh was growing increasingly uncomfortable with how much attention Hayley was receiving, not just from the fans but from the media and the label. Even though Josh had co-written many songs for the album, including Misery Business, he felt overshadowed by the narrative that Paramore was Hayley's band. The fact that Hayley was being positioned as a sole creative force when in his mind, Paramore was always meant to be a team. To make matters worse, Hayley and Josh's romantic relationship was falling apart, quietly but painfully. While they never made it public at the time, their breakup during the Riot era was messy. Some fans believe that the lyrics on Riot reflected the unraveling of their relationship. The rest of the band was caught in the middle. Jeremy had only recently returned to the lineup after briefly quitting during the first album cycle. So basically, he saw that he was missing out and decided to come crawling back. And Taylor was just beginning to tour with the group. The band was rising fast, but the foundation was still a little shaky. Constantly touring and being around each other stopped being as fun as they thought it would be. But musically, Riot was undeniable. It peaked at number 15, selling over 2 million copies in the US. Critics praised it for its infectious energy and emotionally charged songwriting. By the end of the Riot era, Paramore was a headlining act, performing at massive festivals and touring non-stop. But underneath all the fame, the band was growing increasingly frustrated. Josh and Hayley's personal and creative fallout would only escalate in the years to come with Riot, but would mark the beginning of that divide. In 2008, Paramore did a thing, and I may not have watched the movie when I was a kid, but I sure listened to the song. The band reached a new level of visibility when they released a song for the first Twilight movie, the song being Decode, and it was the perfect match. The track's haunting atmosphere and emotional intensity captured the vibe of the first Twilight movie amazingly. And the MTV Movie Awards, helping Paramore break out of the Warped Tour bubble and reach a much broader mainstream audience. But the tension doesn't stop. By the late 2010, Paramore erupted into a public breakup. On December 18th, the band announced that Josh and Zach were leaving. A few days later, on the 21st, Josh dropped a scathing exit statement on his blog, accusing the band of being a manufactured product of a major label, but also going out of his way to highlight that Hayley was the only member actually signed to Atlantic Records. A year prior, the band had released their third studio album, Brand New Eyes, and you could tell that there was issues internally. The album was basically built on internal conflict. Hayley and Josh were no longer dating, and their personal rift had spilled into songwriting. Hayley later said in interviews that writing Brand New Eyes nearly broke them as a band because they couldn't avoid talking about what they were all feeling anymore. The singles Ignorance, Playing God, and Brick by Boring Brick explain the pieces of internal conflict in the band. In the letter, Josh attacked Hayley personally, calling her controlling and manipulative, describing Paramore as her solo vehicle, and even criticizing her songwriting and faith. He pointed to lyrics from Brand New Eyes like "The truth never set me free," arguing that it conflicted with his interpretation of the Christian scripture. The letter also suggested that Hayley was driven more by label ambition than artistic integrity, which further fueled the feud. Zach's departure was quieter, but no less significant. He and his brother had always been a package deal, and Zach was ready to strike out on his own. 2 days after leaving Paramore, he formed Half Noise, releasing a song called Hide Your Eyes, and Josh began doing his own thing musically. Meanwhile, in the wake of the brothers' exit, Paramore was left as a trio: Hayley, Jeremy, and Taylor. They released a short official statement expressing the surprise and disappointment, but no intention of engaging in the public drama. Instead, they quietly just regrouped. In 2013, Paramore released their long-awaited fourth studio album. The album, all in all, had a shift in tone and genre. And it worked because the album was more brighter and fun. They had the singles Ain't It Fun and Still Into You. Side note, I don't know what it is, but 13-year-old me loved the raw vocals for this song.
Wonder how we got this far, 'cause I don't really need to wonder at all. Yeah, after all this time, I'm still into you.
Those two singles were just a massive success. Ain't It Fun earning them their first Grammy Award, and the album debuted at number 1. Even with all the success, the group members were still having issues. Jeremy, who had already left once before during the band's early years, left the band again in late 2015. This time, it wasn't quiet. In early 2016, Jeremy filed a lawsuit against Hayley and Paramore's business entity. He claimed that he was unfairly denied ownership and royalties for his contributions to the self-titled album. According to Jeremy, he had co-written a bulk of the album's songs and deserved a larger share of the earnings. Paramore, now legally operating under Hayley's name as the sole owner of the business, denied his claims and maintained that Jeremy was compensated fairly for his role, not a co-creator. The lawsuit was dragged into 2017 and was ultimately settled out of court in spring, just before the band was set to release After Laughter, another example of a close friendship and bandmate relationship turning into a business dispute. During all of this, Hayley was going through marital issues. She had married Chad Gilbert of New Found Glory in 2016 after years of dating, but the marriage quietly fell apart. In 2017, Hayley announced their separation in a heartfelt but vague Instagram post. What the public would learn later, through their interviews and her solo music, was the collapse of her marriage wasn't just emotionally devastating, it triggered a serious mental health spiral. Hayley began to suffer from depression, exhaustion, and what she later described as an identity death. She felt disillusioned with the music industry and deeply isolated as the face of Paramore, and she was haunted by the feeling that no matter how much she tried to push the Paramore is a band message, she would always be seen as a solo act. And then the departure of Jeremy only deepened that feeling. In early 2016, after years of uncertainty and legal wrangling, Paramore welcomed back an original member, Zac Farro. As I said previously, Zac had left alongside his brother Josh in 2010, but rejoined during sessions for the new album. He described the reunion as deeply emotional, saying that he had no identity anymore, that being in the studio together felt like they hadn't skipped a beat. After Laughter was released in 2017, and the album embraced an infectious 80s sound, with the single Hard Times and Rose Colored Boy. Meanwhile, fans were watching Hayley and Taylor's relationship evolve from friends to more than friends, with Hayley telling The Guardian that their emotional intimacy sparked after working so closely, saying, "We didn't risk confirming it if we weren't extremely secure." Now, in the midst of good news is always a little bad news. Zac's stance on the band's values, especially when his brother Josh began making public homophobic statements. In late 2020, Josh came under fire after screenshots surfaced from his public Facebook page revealing a series of homophobic comments. In one post, he allegedly compared homosexuality to pedophilia. Y'all know I can't say the word, calling both terms perversions. His profile also appeared to show support for Donald Trump, as he liked several pro-Trump posts. The backlash was pretty swift, and fans widely condemned his views. The band later reaffirmed their strong support for the LGBT community, clearly distancing themselves. And his brother following along, distancing himself also, reaffirming Paramore's commitment to inclusivity. After Laughter wrapped, and Paramore quietly disappeared from the spotlight, and for a while, fans were actually unsure if the band was done for good. But behind the scenes, Hayley was beginning a deeply personal transformation. She took time off to focus on her mental health, attend therapy, and process the years of burnout, grief, and unresolved tension. Not necessarily just from the music, but just the industry in general, and from her personal life. She later said that for the first time in years, she wasn't sure who she was outside of Paramore. The soul search ended up in 2 solo albums for Hayley, Petals for Armor and Flowers for Vases, with critics praising her for raw honesty. Meanwhile, the band continued to remain low-key, Zac focusing on his solo project Half Noise, and Taylor continued collaborating quietly in the background. But by late 2021, whispers of a Paramore reunion started circulating, and they made it official. In 2023, Paramore released their long-awaited 6th studio album, This Is Why, their first in 6 years. The album was a sonic evolution, critics praising it as a grown-up version of Paramore. From being teenagers to now adults, Whatever's left of Paramore has grown and reflected each chapter of their lives, gaining new members and losing people along the way. Josh believed he deserved equal credit for Paramore's rise. After all, he was a founding member and co-writer on many of their biggest hits, but the spotlight was always on Hayley. Not necessarily because she wanted it, but because the label and the media and the fans all naturally gravitated towards her. It was her voice, her look, and her story, and no matter how much she insisted that Paramore is a band, it often fell on deaf ears. Hayley never asked to be a solo act, but over time she became one. It was Paramore on the Grammy wins, but it was her face to the audience, her face on magazine covers, her signature voice on every hook, and when the band fell apart, it was Hayley who had to pick up the pieces. But you guys let me know your thoughts about Paramore and the rise and fall of the band. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. Toodles!